Welcome everybody to Cancer ABC's second video about how to best control or use your doctor's appointments. In this video, I'm going to interview Jan Manarite, who is a superb and very experienced caregiver. And she's going to tell us three stories about what or how she worked with her husband, Dominic, as they went to the doctors. So I think everybody knows Jan, so I'm not going to go beyond that. And I'm going to say I'm glad you're here with us. In the meantime, I'm going to ask Jan if she would share her first story at this point.
Thanks, Joel. Joel and I have worked together for over a decade. We know each other really well. He's very good with adjectives. He bumped me up just a little bit, superior and whatever the other one was. But Joel and I really did have to work our doctor's appointments. Joel did it as a patient. I did it as a caregiver. My journey with my husband was 13 years. Joel's has been more than that. We want to share with you what we believe we've learned in working the doctor appointment to make it work for the cancer patient. So my first story is about, this happened to us way back in the year 2000, and my husband was 58 and I was 44, and our son was 9, and my husband's PSA was over 7,000, and his Gleason score was 9, and I was overwhelmed. And but I've always been a question asker. You can ask my mom. She didn't really like it a lot all the time, but I've always been a question asker. And I knew there's a lot in the beginning, but what we found out very quickly was that his prostate cancer was in his bones. It was not in his lymph nodes. His CAT scan, which measures lymph nodes, was negative, but it was in his bones. And I'm talking his entire spinal cord, his ribs on both sides, which they call bilateral, his and his skull.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what a prostate was, but darn if I didn't know that his bones needed help, and I needed to find out about bones. And I know they did this thing called a bone scan. I didn't know what that was, but boy, I was going to get a copy of that report. So I did. Yeah. And I began to research bones. Medical records speak. Thank you, Joel.
Right. So because you got a copy of that scan, and that scan is part of Dominic's medical records.
Yes. And I found these big words on it, and I was overwhelmed, but that didn't, I didn't care. It was my husband. It was my son's father. And so I was going to Google the big words. So I did. And things like the word osseous, which is O-S-S-E-O-U-S. I'm like, what are they talking about? And so I Googled it, and it was like, it just meant bones. And I'm like, well, why don't they just say bones? Don't they know I'm trying to research for my husband? But that made sense because osseous, osteoporosis. So I began to learn. And learning is empowering. It takes you straight out of your fear like that. And then as I began to learn and think about things and digest it, I developed better questions. And I'll be darned if better questions weren't the road to better answers. So I stopped looking for answers and I started looking for better questions, and I did it straight out of his medical records. And before I knew it, I was asking the doctor about something. Now this is before Exgeva, before Prolia, and it was before Zometa even. This was before Zometa.
Just to clarify, those drugs you mentioned, they are bone strengthening drugs, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
They are. And they're labeled differently for, whether you have metastasis or you're on hormone therapy or what your state of disease is, or whether you have osteoporosis. By the way, if you don't know if you have osteoporosis, if you don't measure for it, and that's some type of bone mineral density test. So going back to the story, I had to fight for some kind of a bone strengthening drug for him. And his first treatment was actually, this goes way back, was actually Iridia, which was pamidronate. And that wasn't FDA approved specifically either, but somehow we fought for it. I don't remember how that all worked. And we got it for him because I kept the cancer patient first, and that was my husband. And I knew that his bones needed help. We then, I think he got into some kind of a clinical trial where he was able to get Zometa. So he started Zometa, and that was before it was FDA approved. And with all these bone metastases, he didn't have a bone fracture. I watched, one day he was sitting at his desk and he fell backwards and he fell off the chair. And I looked at him like, oh my God, what are you doing? But
Yeah.
he didn't fracture anything.
So since you were able to convince the doctor or work with the doctor in order
Work
to
with the doctor.
basically get drugs that were at that point not FDA approved, but you got involved with the doctor and you did a thing that now we know.
I did. Hold that up just a little bit higher, one notch up. There you go.
Okay.
Before shared decision making was a term that I knew, I was doing shared decision making way back in the year 2000. I didn't even know it. So I also, but I also picked my battles. I didn't fight every treatment, but I knew that this one was important because of this bone scan thing that talked about osseous, which meant bones. And I knew instinctively that this was critical before I even, did much of anything else. So yeah, I mean, get those medical records. My doctor has a copy is not good enough. Yeah. Your doctor has a copy for your doctor. Get your own medical records. There's three main reasons for that. One is that, you can Google every one of those big words. They're written for doctors, but we hope to actually work on that and see if we can get them in more plain English. Second is, if you switch doctors or go to a different doctor, which is common when you have advanced prostate cancer, you cannot rely on the system transferring those records all the time. I would say in my experience, it happens about 50% of the time.
Right.
I bring my own.
Oh.
I bring my husband's records. I hand them to the doctor. I say, here you go. You don't have to go find your office manager to see if they faxed them. I have them for you. That's putting the cancer patient first. We
Right.
saved the doctor time, saved us time.
Yeah, but I want to make sure that you don't take and give the doctor or the doctor's office your only copy. Make a copy of it so
Correct.
that you still have those records for yourself.
Or I just give him the record and tell him to have his person make a copy, but give it back to me. I just had to do that for myself this week.
Right.
The doctor walked off with my record. I'm like, come back.
Yeah, make sure you don't leave the office without a copy. I think that's really the rule there.
Yeah. There's two ways to get them. One is when you're talking to the patient's talking to the doctor. Patient is the only one that has the power to ask. The doctor is the only one that has the power to say yes. Second way is to be connected to their online patient portal, electronic medical records, online medical records, whatever they call it, my chart, whatever it is. So, and then you can get them online. So those are the two different ways. But yeah, medical records speak. Get your records. Google the big words. So that's my first story. Okay. I was shocked, by the way, that I might come up with a question that was so important to my husband that the doctor didn't. Hold it up just a little higher, just a little bit higher. There you go. That the doctor didn't ask. But you got to remember that the system is sometimes overwhelmed, strained, and so are our doctors. And you just need to be part of the solution and keep the cancer patient first.
Right. So what you need to do is make sure you have good questions. You can think about these questions before your doctor's appointment, write them down so that you don't forget stuff that's important, but also listen to what the answers are because they'll help you develop other additional questions that you want answered so that you can obviously get involved in making the decisions or participating in shared decision making with your doctor and get knowledge and treatments and education that's going to improve the quality of care that you could get otherwise.
Right, and the reason we're mentioning shared decision-making is just a term that both patients understand, but doctors use. So you're using the doctor's own language, which builds a bridge quicker, which is what all you're trying to do. You're trying to build a bridge. If you got walls you have to knock down, the cancer patient sits in the appointment and wonders when you're going to get to him. So it's a phrase that builds bridges.
Right. Great. That's a good story, and I think there are
Thank
some
you.
really important lessons. Thank you. So now we're going to move on to story number 2.
Yes, story number 2. You're going to remind me what it was. Sorry.
It's going to be changing doctors and
Oh,
you know
yeah.
and relationship building.
Yeah. So, because my husband was so advanced and metastatic from the get-go, we were in sort of an emergency situation pretty quickly, which we stayed in off and on. It was very much a roller coaster ride. We'd have a victory and then a setback, and but each doctor appointment could be very important because we were constantly looking for and planning for the next treatment.
Right.
So it's a little bit different if you're newly diagnosed and low risk. He was very high risk, metastatic from the get-go.
Hmm.
We had to change doctors more than once. And I believe we changed doctors 5 or 6 times. Never easy. That's right.
Yeah.
But trust your instincts on that one. I hope you guys don't mind our signs, but this is the way, if this was a written article, these would be the bullet points.
Right.
um, but it was always, so here's what I noticed. I would get it like this. I'm like, this doctor's not working. You're not first in the appointment. He's, not listening to my questions. But yes, no doctors are perfect. But my husband often liked the doctor, or might want to, because they could talk about golf or they could talk about fishing. My husband was a charter captain on Sanibel Island in Florida. He liked the guy, and I'm like, but you don't understand, he's not helping you. I'm asking really important questions, and I'm not convinced we're getting the kinds of answers that help you, you
Right.
know. But I learned to make the suggestion and then wait for I learned that I was getting things right away. Lift it up just a little bit, Joel. There you go. I was getting things, because I didn't have the cancer, I guess. I wasn't in pain. I wasn't wrestling with my PSA. But I learned to then wait for my husband to catch up with me, because I was
Right.
already, half a mile down the road and he was still on the first block. So, but once I got that concept, it worked.
Yeah.
It helped me, to be patient, that
Right.
his timing was going to be different than mine.
So we need to stay focused on why we're there. It's nice to have a pleasant relationship with your doctor, but you really have to stay focused. So we as patients need to remember that. And I think that it would be a task that a caregiver could see if you see us becoming too social and not focusing on what's really needed because we have a limited time.
Yeah.
Caregiver probably should help, steer the conversation back to what's important.
Yeah, and I had to give time for my husband to talk to the doctor and talk about fishing. I had to give him that space of time, but you're right, I had to steer it back
Right.
to me. And what I would actually do in order to keep him the most important thing in the appointment, which was the goal. By the way, I learned if I'm battling the doctor, the doctor becomes the most important thing in the appointment. That never works.
Right.
So I had to shift my thinking to keeping the cancer patient the most important thing in the appointment, which was my husband, which was my son's father. And I had to I was constantly shifting my thinking and relearning things in a way that worked.
Right.
I got to where I wanted to get, where I knew we needed to go. My husband got to where he needed to go, even though he might not realize it till the next day, but I got it.
Yeah.
And that inspired me to, continue doing things like that. I would usually talk, and then after I was done asking my questions, handing him the medical records, because I would ask him questions straight out of the medical records. I'd circle something on the bone scan and say, this is what my question is. And I hand it to him. We had those kinds of conversations that were direct, yes, that were targeted, and always taught me something else. And I went home not with a bunch of questions, but with a bunch of questions answered. And then I would sort of pass the baton to my husband after I did that and say, honey, what do you think?
Right.
And let him just talk to the doctor and finish it out. These are things I learned to do to keep the cancer patient first.
Yeah.
I was the caregiver advocate. I was the one who, I didn't cook his favorite meal because his appetite was all over the place and he didn't want that. My husband wanted me to fight for him.
Right.
That's what he wanted. So I did.
So the communication is important, not only between the patient and the caregiver and the doctor, but also you're kind of going to the fact that there needs to be really good communication between the caregiver and the patient himself.
Yeah,
And
and you can
and
count
that's
on that
something,
falling apart. You can
yeah,
count on that falling apart because it's emotional and it's hard.
right,
So you have to find ways to come back around. And sometimes you just need to breathe for a day.
right.
And
And so I think that your point that you said earlier about running ahead and waiting, I mean, the emotional situation for a patient and a caregiver, they're both pretty intense, but they're
yeah,
different. And they change. So there may well come a time that the caregiver needs to really take some assistance. I don't want to use that word control, but really to kind of support where the patient is, even if it means, if they're ahead,
run
you
ahead
know,
and wait for your husband. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. It's something that I noticed. Noticing is very powerful. It kind of takes you out of knowing, think you know
Right.
everything.
Right.
Shift over to noticing, and what happens is you get in the journey and you learn as you go, and it helps me a lot.
Yeah. So,
So
so I'm going to ask you, when you were at your doctor's appointments with Dominic, did you ever feel at a time, because you were kind of, very involved and maybe taking control at some times, that Dominic had some issues with that?
I had to be sensitive to that constantly and watch for where that was shifting back and forth, but I did know that he wanted me to fight for him.
Yeah. And
um
again, it's listening and staying in touch with him and where he's at during the meeting or during the doctor's appointment.
Yeah, it's sort of back and forth. One time things were so intense that this doctor seemed to be like two different people sometimes in the appointment. We really liked him at first, and then the next month he was like different. And yeah, no doctors are perfect, but it took a strain on our relationship.
Yeah.
And one time, this doctor did something, he made me cry. And I watched my husband change from talking about fishing and golf and everything else to being my protector. And he rose up and he said, "Look, my wife is fighting for me." And the doctor just backed right down. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if I'm doing it right or wrong. I just wanted to fight for my husband, you
Yeah.
know. And we left there. And I remember getting in the car and I said, "Okay, we're going to give him 3 strikes, because I don't want to have I don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction to something, right? You can have 1 strike." And again, remember, my husband's situation was metastatic. We were, PSA over 7,000. His PSA was rising again.
Hmm.
And, I don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction to 1 strike by the doctor. You can have 1, but on 2 strikes, we're already looking for another doctor.
And what happens on the third strike, Jan?
He's out. He was out. And that allowed me changing doctors is never easy. That's right. But we were always glad when we did.
Uh-huh.
We never regretted it. We could have gone back if we wanted to, but we
Right.
never regretted going through the hard journey of changing doctors. It's just that I would know it first, he would know it second, and the 3-strike rule helped us to laugh about it.
Right. So
And it also helped us to think about it and prepare and not overreact to one thing, because I walked out of there crying.
what is the difference between changing a doctor, 3 strikes and you're out, and getting a second opinion? Because second opinions are important, and I think they are. That's a different concept, and I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Yeah, good point. We were in the same system, which was Florida Cancer Specialists. So to see another doctor in that same system, we had to change. What you're doing constantly is working the medical system. So you have to learn how the system works, right? If we had gone to, let's say, University of Miami for a second opinion at a different institution, that would have been a second opinion. This was the same type of doctor, which was a medical oncologist, not a urologist, who is a surgeon. I want to throw this in. I'm going to throw this in. Most surgeons are trained and board certified in surgery. Well, they all are, but most are not trained or board certified in internal medicine.
Right.
I'm going to say that again. I've had this validated by AUA when I wrote an article. Most urologists are not trained or board certified in internal medicine. They
Right.
are in surgery. They're basically primarily and sometimes like just surgeons. You
Right.
notice the nurse in their clinic is a surgical nurse.
Yeah.
So a medical oncologist is trained, is board certified in internal medicine. I think people just have the right to understand that
Right.
so they can make their doctor decisions.
So I think what's really important is making sure that you're actually seeing. I wish I had the sign, but I'm not fast enough. It's really
Yeah.
important to understand the type of doctor you need at the various stage of the cancer, and making sure that the doctor that you're seeing is that type of doctor. So if you're going to have a prostatectomy, that you want to be with a urologist because, as you said, they're surgeons.
Correct.
But at some point, it moves into more an internal medicine issue, and so a medical oncologist is probably someone who will serve you better. Would you agree with that?
I think that patients need to decide if they'll serve them better. In most cases, I mean, you got to say often, yes, but we need to empower the patients to make that decision. If they don't know that a urologist is not trained or board certified in internal medicine, I was shocked when I found that out.
Yeah.
And I've been doing advocacy for almost 10 years. I'm like, nobody told me this, you know.
Right.
I would have wanted to know that. My husband would want to know that. People deserve to have the information so they can decide. Some people may have a great relationship with their urologist. The relationship is everything, right? So that's their decision. Yeah. However, if you get into internal medicine things, there's definitely some benefits to being with a medical oncologist who's trained in internal medicine and advanced cancer. There are
Exactly.
multiple benefits. One of them is you usually get a nurse practitioner in addition to the doctor. That's
Right.
one.
Right. So I want to just step backwards a little bit in this in our conversation,
Yeah.
and talk about second opinions and what they really are and why one considered them. You talked about how it worked within your experience, but what are second opinions and why are they important?
Well, I think everybody knows what a second opinion is, but um, they're important because sometimes you need to just trust your instincts that you have more questions or the questions you have weren't answered correctly or your instincts are telling you more. It's good to talk to other patients and a local support group about your local doctors is always good.
Yeah.
Tell me about this doctor. Do you know anybody that's been to them? Um, I mean, second opinions are, yeah.
I think second opinions also for me, when I use them for, is just to get,
Yes.
even if I'm not necessarily have that little flag going off in my brain saying I need more or whatever, but sometimes having the confirmation of what is being recommended or suggested makes things easier. It makes, going ahead and making a treatment decision a lot easier
Yes.
because you have another expert saying this is really where you want to go. And it makes the process and the decision making in the shared decision making a lot easier for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I understand that.
Yeah.
So, because it's a big decision, you need to be able to sleep at night. If
Right.
you go to sleep at night, you put your head in a pillow thinking, I want a second opinion. That's a good time to trust your instincts and go get a second opinion.
Right.
As
Exactly.
this treatment decisions are important, they
Right.
matter. So
Right. Exactly.
it does
So
take
I think
time. That's the hard part. It takes time.
unless you
Want
have
to move
any,
on? Story number 3.
yeah, and yeah, I was going to say, unless you have something to add to that story, I'd love to move on to the next story.
I'm good.
So,
You
why
said
don't you share with us the next story that you had with Dominic?
Oh, yeah. It was about uh, learning to make the cancer patient first in the appointment all the time and finding a way to do that because I was also emotional and I had questions and I was really good at asking questions. Asked my mother. Um, well, she didn't like some of my questions, but that's okay. But that's, a way of learning and growing, and it's a really important part of being in the process. Yes. So, since I was so good at it, and then, at the time, actually, quick digress, Dr. Stephen Strom at Prostate Cancer Research Institute, PCRI, was the one who hired me way back in 2000 and began to train me. And So anyway, he taught me a lot of these things. And then Mark Scholes, proceeded to take over PCRI. I've learned a lot there. But take me back. Where was I?
So we were talking about that, how important it is to make the cancer patient,
Yes.
the subject, of the appointment.
Thank you. So I was a very well-trained advocate, is my point.
Right.
That was my point.
That's okay. No problem.
And I was now helping other people, and I was now had access to Dr. Steven Strum and Dr. Mark Scholes. And so I was unusual as a caregiver. There was very few caregivers coming in, thank you, who were working for an organization, helping other people. By the time we changed to our last doctor that we were with for 10 years, he was awesome. He actually gave me permission to call in an order. I was calling in and ordering my husband's blood work before the appointment.
Well,
that's really unusual, but I did ask Florida cancer specialists if that's ever happened before, and I was told no, not before you and not after you. So I was different. Yeah, I was different. Yeah. I was just being myself for my son and for my husband, and that's my job, is to be the best version of myself.
So I just don't want caregivers to say, well, I don't have the ability or the okay to be ordering, or suggesting blood work in that way. That doesn't mean that you're not a good caregiver. It just means everyone's role and experience is different.
Your husband will let you know what he needs from you. Let him tell you. There's so many different ways, and your relationship, where it works and where it doesn't. Be yourself, be that person. Let perfection go. Perfection was never the goal, but we tend to go to it right away because it's such a big issue. It's not the goal. It's doing the best you can. It's meeting your husband or your partner where they're at, taking the next step and being part of the solution. Yes, raise that just a little bit. The bottom word is getting lost. Yes, thank you. So because I was such a powerful advocate in the doctor's appointment, I had to be careful not to suck up too much of the time. My husband needed his own conversations with the doctors, right? And I remember being aware of that. And we were going to the doctor every month for a while because we were constantly evaluating and changing treatments. I came up with the idea that, I could just step out of I was always in every doctor appointment. Dominic never had an appointment alone, not ever. And after several years of doing this, I thought, he really needs to talk to his doctor. I bet he would do it different if I'm not in the room. Because he talks to his doctor different when his wife is around, I don't know how personal he really wants to get. I don't know what's in the back of his mind and deep in his soul that he needs to talk about. I'm going to go get a drink of water. Right. So I did.
Yeah.
I got a drink of water.
So you excused yourself and said, I need to go out and get some water, and that allowed Dominic to have an interaction without you present.
Exactly. Yeah. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell the doctor. I didn't tell Dominic. I just excused myself and said, I'm going to get a drink of water. I think I said, I'm going to let you two talk. It felt like it was the right thing. I think I did that a couple times.
So put your sign up about instincts.
Trust your instincts, people.
Right. So if you think that your husband or your partner, could benefit from not having you there, if that's what your instinct is telling you, excuse yourself for a brief period of time.
Yeah. And you don't probably do every appointment, but it was my instinct that he needed that. He hadn't had enough of that. I wanted him to have that. And that was my way of keeping the cancer patient first in the appointment. I had done my job. I came in prepared. I'd asked my questions, and I passed the baton back to him.
Right.
And I let him be the most important thing. Another thing I realized, going back to being with a medical oncologist, one of the benefits is you usually get either a physician's assistant, PA, or a nurse practitioner. They come in before the appointment, they spend time with you. And I learned to ask the nurse about side effects and the doctor about the treatment. I'm going to say that again. Ask the nurse about the side effects and the doctor about the treatment. And the reason is, we're going to ask the doctor too about the side effects, but it seemed that he had an obligation to rattle off a laundry list, which we got lost in. But I understood that was his job, but again, I didn't want to fight the doctor. I just wanted to talk to somebody. But the nurses also had a tendency to spend more time with patients, to listen more, to touch them, examine them. They were just seemed to have a tendency to be better at side effects. So I began telling people as an advocate to talk to the nurse about the side effects and the doctor about the treatment.
So
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because if you read the descriptions of a lot of our treatments and you read the potential side effects, it's like it can spin your head.
It's a
And,
laundry list.
and it's like a laundry list, and it's like, who the heck would want to have any of that? But I think what's important to understand that this is a list of possible side effects, and it doesn't mean that you're going to have a side effect. It doesn't
Yeah, but you
mean that,
still need to know more as a patient.
right,
So, you and I worked with, pharmaceutical advocates and companies trying to get them to do things like put percentages in. What percentage of patients had fatigue? Was it 10% or 90%? That's a big difference to me,
right. And
especially if you're talking about something serious. And I guarantee the serious side effects, if you see something like, heart problems or, fracture, I guarantee they're rare. Ask.
right.
They're rare, but they're obligated to put it in the label of the drug. But
Right.
ask.
And
Serious side
also,
effects are always rare.
right. And also the label doesn't talk about the level of severity. So
Correct.
many of these side effects can be kind of just like, yeah, I have it, but it's not a big deal. Or it could be quite significant. So
Yeah.
you're not gonna get all the side effects. These are just possible side effects, and you don't really know what severity. And my experience is that every person is very different. Just as as to what the side effects might or might not be. And even in my experience, when I've gone on and off a treatment, the side effects aren't necessarily the same each time.
Right.
So that's
I heard
something
that
that,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
And if you do have a side effect, you should talk to the doctor about ways you might be able to ameliorate those side effects. You don't need to necessarily tough it out,
Or
uh,
the nurse.
or the nurse.
Really good at
Exactly,
that. Yeah.
exactly. Uh,
I'm just gonna
or the
go a step
nurse.
further and say nurses are better.
Okay.
And that's not 100%. I know I'm stereotyping, but nurses really tend to be better at that. So,
So you don't need to, as I said, you don't need to tough it out. You don't need to be a hero because there are ways in many instances where you can just make it better, and you just have to ask and get involved in your
yeah.
treatment and remediation of side effects.
Quick thoughts on asking questions about side effects.
Okay.
Ask the doctor, how severe was this side effect that I read about in the trial? Because that's what they'll be talking about. And they give them grades, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4. And then ask the doctor how many people in the trial had that side effect. If it was a mild side effect, and like fatigue could be mild or it can be
Right.
severe.
Right.
A mild side effect and it happened to 5% of people, I'm moving on to the next question. I'm good. Like
Yeah.
I'll take that. Now I'm evaluating risk and benefit, which is what you need to do in shared decision
Which
making.
is exactly which I somewhere have the science of shared decision making. I'm holding it up.
I
But
know,
shared
shared
decision
decision
making
making.
is important, and that involves understanding and asking those questions and doing
Yeah,
research and
yeah,
asking the doctor and the nurse.
yeah.
Yeah, great.
Remember that the doctor had years of training that you and I don't know. But dang it, you're the one who goes home with the cancer. You live with it, you sleep with it, you talk about it, you know, hopefully you don't eat with it, but I mean you live with it. So you are an expert at you.
Right.
You are an expert at your life, how you feel, what you think, what your priorities are. You bring that expertise to your doctor's appointment and you engage as your personal expert on what's important to you.
I'm really, really glad that you said that because one of the things I am aware of from my own experience and I share is that as you've just mentioned that you're the person that goes home with the positive or the negative results of whatever
Right.
decisions you make. And you can have the sweetest and nicest and kindest and most empathetic doctor in the universe, but the reality of it is they go on from your meeting to their next patient or to lunch or back to their home, where you go back home with whatever the end result's going to be. So you have to be number one, because if you're not number one for yourself, and if, honestly, no one else is going to be, your caregiver can really care and could really love you. And sometimes I think, by the way, I do have to say this, I think sometimes it's harder to be a caregiver than it is to be a patient. Um, I,
Yeah.
that's been I mean, obviously it's different for
Yeah.
people, but being a caregiver, and I want to take my hat off to caregivers because we are talking about
Yeah.
caregiving a little bit here.
Yeah. Yeah.
You guys have a tough job, and and thank you so much. As more of a patient than a caregiver myself, I thank you all. Um, and you also need to find ways to take care of yourself. And I think maybe we need to do another video about that because it's an important issue. I don't want
I
to.
think caregivers know that, Joel. But when you're a caregiver and it's your husband, you are willing to exhaust yourself at least a little bit, because you have to know in your soul that you gave it everything you could, even if it exhausted you.
Right.
But
But if
caregivers
Dan, but if you,
caregivers know they need to take care of themselves. You don't have to be perfect. You
so
don't.
I agree with you partially. I think that sometimes caregivers can lose sight of their own self, and I think they need to sometimes draw back, because honestly, if you exhaust yourself and you
I'm
make
just saying it
yourself,
differently as
yeah,
a caregiver.
yeah,
The ones who are exhausted, I'm more times than often think that they have to be perfect. I'm saying you don't.
right,
I'm saying stay with whatever step you're on. Break it down to one step at a time. But if they exhaust themselves doing that, that's because they have to know they gave it their all. That's where I sleep at night. You have to sleep at night as a cancer patient because you're making a treatment decision. I just need to know I gave my all to my son's husband. Then
right.
I'm asleep. So we're all going to be a little exhausted,
Hmm.
but caregivers come from that place. They'll exhaust themselves,
Right.
but they're doing it for
But,
the right
but on
reason.
the other hand, I think,
Don't do it for perfection.
yeah, I think that a caregiver, I don't, I hear you, but I think a caregiver also needs to understand that if they can put themselves out of the game by getting too exhausted, and they're
Yeah,
not
but
actually
that's not,
not going to be able to do a good
I
job
know,
being a
I
caregiver.
know, but that just adds on another should, which is another burden. I'm speaking the same issue a little bit different way.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
Good. Okay. So I think we're good with the three stories. I think
I
they've been
think we're
great
good.
take homes. And unless you have something to add on a story, I just want to wrap it up.
I'm ready to wrap it up.
Okay.
Yeah,
That
we're here to
sounds,
help people. We've lived it. Me for 13 years, Joel for 15 plus.
yeah.
What's your number, Joel? 15 years?
Actually, with initial diagnosis 19, metastatic for 15. Um, so for prostate.
We're here to help you.
Yeah.
Yeah, to help you
So
thrive.
yeah. So here, so I want, now that we're done with this little conversation, Jan and I are going to be reaching out to other people who may have stories they want to share about their doctor experiences and some of the take homes they've learned. So if you have any interest in sharing a story, I would invite you to reach out to either Jan or myself. Jan's, can I give your email, Jan? Would that be okay?
Yeah, Jan at cancerabcs.org.
Right. And I'm Joel, Joel, at cancerabcs.org. And give us a brief summary of your story, because we would love to do a video as part of the series. And
But
with
we'll be
that,
looking for the take-home lesson, so we'll help pull that out for you. Yeah.
yeah, got it. Okay. With that, thank you, Jan, for joining me today. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Everyone should take care, be healthy, and do good things in the universe.
Perfect. Good video. Thanks, Joel.
Yeah. Yeah.